It takes a few seconds. Three, two. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, I highly recommend you write a book because it will help you obtain clarity, an identity, self-awareness, and many opportunities. So if you need help with that, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. And if you already have a book that's done and you want to use the book as a lead magnet for your business, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. And now, as you know, on this podcast, we talk a lot about financial literacy, business development, and taking risks for that dream life, dream venture. So I think this book is going to be perfect for you guys if you want to take a listen and see what an individual who looks at risk from a whole different perspective might have to add to your life. I think that this book is relevant no matter what you're in. So managing risk in uncertain times. I think the biggest difference between the most successful entrepreneurs and the ones who don't really make it is that they just handle risk. Wherever there's risk, there is reward. And the subtitle for the book is Leveraging Causos, which I believe is company-owned sponsored organizations. I think that's how it is, right? What
Pretty
is it?
close. Committee of sponsoring
Yeah,
organizations.
Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. I'm sorry about that. New ERM framework. So without further ado, we have Paul Sobel. Sobel. I think I'm saying that right. Thanks so much for being here, Paul.
Happy to be here. An interesting topic, and look forward to contributing whatever I can to your loyal listeners' understanding.
Well, I look at the acronyms that are next to a person's name to see how well educated they are. And I'm looking at your name. There are many. So CIA, QIAL, CRMA. I don't know what that means. So can you explain what that is first off?
Well, certainly. These are actually internal audit related acronyms or certifications. CIA is Certified Internal Auditor, so it's one of those things that can be fun at a party to go up to somebody and say, "Hey, Paul Sobel, CIA," but it actually
Yeah,
means something
that's
very,
right.
very
You
different.
either loved or hated one of the two, or
Yeah,
just like feared.
exactly. Exactly. But yeah, that's kind of the flagship certification for the internal audit profession. I did spend a good portion of my career in internal auditing. QIAL is the qualification in internal audit leadership, just a little separate one that focuses on those who have demonstrated leadership within the profession. And then the CRMA is a certification in risk management assurance, maybe a little more relevant for this particular call. Again, done or issued by the Institute of Internal Auditors, but very much focused on understanding risk management and providing assurance related to risk management. Now, I was a CPA as well. That's something I'm sure a lot of your listeners are more familiar with. When I left the public accounting profession, over time, I realized that I was never going to go back and practice. So I let my license lapse, which means I'm no longer officially allowed to put CPA by my title. But again, kind of once a CPA, always a CPA in my mind.
Nice. So can you give us a quick little background on where you come from? I'm looking at your bio. You've worked with some big companies like Pepsi. And so just give us a quick rundown on where you come from and how you actually ended up in this world.
Sure. So I started off in public accounting. I'm old enough that I can say the big eight days. I can tell you how far back we go.
Yeah, that is the way to do it, right? Big eight,
Yeah.
big six, big four, right? That's how it goes.
Exactly. So started with Arthur Anderson. Actually, did two stints with them. After I got to the point where I said, I don't know that I really want to make that final slog to be a partner. Not sure I want to be a partner. Left and went into the internal audit world. First with Pepsi, as you mentioned, as an international internal audit manager, and then as an audit director for a publicly traded company called Harcourt General. It was Hedman Harcourt Brace Yovanovitch in the publishing primarily. And then I boomeranged back to Arthur Andersen in the internal audit and kind of risk management specialty or consulting area. And this is where I really was exposed to risk topics. Arthur Andersen was on an early edge of trying to help people understand what this enterprise risk management was all about. And I happened to kind of stumble into working in that area, particularly as it relates to risk assessment and enterprise risk assessment, that sort of thing. Um, was then hired by my biggest client to go work for them. They were in the utility industry. My title was Vice President of Risk Assessment. So again, a risk focus. I did have the internal audit function reporting to me, as well as trying to expand the organization's, just understanding of risk assessment and risk management. Then moved to Atlanta, Georgia, which is I still live in Georgia, with a different energy company. That was kind of post Enron. There was a lot of changes going on in the energy industry, and I looked at it as an opportunity to get to a much bigger market, and work in an Enron-like environment. I would say, not from a values perspective, but more from a business type perspective. And so once again, while it was the official title was internal audit, I had a pretty strong role in helping them expand their enterprise risk management area. They went through a merger and moved, and I said, I think I'd rather stay in Atlanta. My family was at an age where I didn't want to move them, and ended up with Georgia Pacific, which is a privately held company, pretty large, and they had a little different approach to risk. So I spent much of my time there as the head of internal audit, but also became the chief risk officer for about the last year and a half before I ended up retiring from there. And again, it was very interesting to work in a private environment where you're not subject to, SEC filings, quarterly earnings calls, things like that. Easier to take a little longer term view of how you identify and manage risks, where in a public company, it tends to be a little more quarter to quarter. Along the way, you mentioned books. I had never really planned on being an author, but somebody was trolling conferences, the way I put it, back when I was speaking about risk management. And they said, you have a real down to earth way of explaining it. Everybody else seems to be up in the clouds. Can we get you to write a book? And I hemmed and hawed, but finally decided, okay, I'll give it a shot. And while it was focused on auditing, it could be internal or external auditing. It was called Auditor's Risk Management Guide. It gave me a chance, and for your listeners who are thinking about writing a book, I think this can be really helpful advice. It gave me a chance to kind of think through all of these ideas bouncing around in my head, and then figuring out, well, which ones really can work versus which are maybe pie in the sky. And the ones that work end up in the book and the others didn't. And I could kind of test them on my team at the company I worked with at that point. So I've done other books as well, including the one that you just mentioned. This was the most recent one. And again, each time I didn't say, hey, I think I'm ready for another book. Somebody came and asked me, would you be interested in writing about this? And I thought about it and said, I think there's a place in the market for that. I think I have a perspective. If I can organize my thoughts and write them down, I think people will find it interesting. And I never did it for the money. I did it more to organize my thoughts, kind of give back to the professions. I'll say that plurally because it's not just auditing or risk management. As a way to just say, hey, here's some ideas. I've gone through this, a lot of thought, a lot of trial and error. Maybe this will help you. So again, anybody who's interested in writing a book or is even thinking about it, I think it can be, a laborious process. It can really be a great process to go through to really help you organize your thoughts that you can apply in your business, as well as maybe help others apply in theirs.
Great. Yeah. Just simplifying your message, right? What you say to people on stage, you figure out what works, what lands, the
Mhm.
questions that you are asked. And then you say, wow, there's obviously a built-in demand. There's an audience for this. Let me articulate it in a book that I would be able to tell somebody who's not familiar with this world exactly what it entails. And so it simplifies your message and it helps you become a better communicator in every aspect of life. So I'm with you on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and
Uh,
one other aspect of that, it applies to both presentations as well as writing books, is I always tried to step back and say, If I were reading this, would I be interested in it? Would I understand it? So it's not me just telling what I know. It's trying to put myself in the seat of the participant at a seminar or a book reader to say, would this be relevant and helpful to them? And I think that's really important because, again, it's not just what you know, it's how other people can understand what you know and use it in a practical way.
And just to clarify for me and for the audience, CAUSO, a committee-owned sponsored organization, what is that?
So that's something those who are with larger companies, been in the financial world for a while, are probably somewhat familiar with a history that goes back into the 1980s. When there was a series of financial defalcations, primarily related to savings and loan, there was a threat of government intervention and regulation passing. The private sector said, "Gee, we don't want that. Let's see if we can put together this committee of 5 sponsoring organizations to try and understand what happened related to internal controls over financial reporting with those companies, and what do you recommend going forward?" So COSO, as the acronym is typically referred to, developed an internal control framework. This was back in 1992 that was really well thought of, but kind of sat on a lot of bookshelves, I think. And then in the US, we had this little thing called Enron and WorldCom and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So again, I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs. They're probably not to that point yet, but they may want to get to the point where they're publicly traded. And the Sarbanes-Oxley Act is extremely relevant once you're publicly traded. And there's a lot of pieces of that regulation, but one of the ones is Section 404, which requires basically the CEO and CFO of a publicly traded organization to certify as to the effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting. And then your external auditor has to kind of opine on, yeah, did they do it right? And when the SEC did their rulemaking on this, they said you must use a suitable framework such as COSO's internal control integrated framework. So all of a sudden now that was the only one they mentioned, and now everybody said we need to understand COSO's internal control framework. COSO updated it in 2013 to make it really a little more modern and take advantage of a couple decades of experience. And in the meantime, they also issued a framework on enterprise risk management, which is really what the book you referred to is talking about, COSO's ERM framework. And I've had some experience with that. That's why I ended up writing the book. But again, long and the short of it is COSO. It's not a company. They have no employees. It is a committee of 5 sponsoring organizations that work together to develop guidance related to internal control, risk management, governance, and fraud detection.
Got
And
it.
I actually served as the chairman of that for 5 years. So a lot of this just kind of trickles off of my tongue because I know it quite well. I left that role at the end of 2022. But I really do think that it does provide the business world with a lot of helpful guidance in trying to navigate those topics.
Whenever I hear the phrase enterprise risk management, I'm always, I guess confused because I think of a business that even when I started it back in 2017, I don't care who it was, financial experts, anybody, nothing was there yet, right? So nobody could really clarify numbers or anything to me and really take me off my path. I was able to see something in my head that nobody else could see and then try to bring it to life. And I'll be honest, on paper, it didn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. So risk, to me is making something that's really, really, really dangerous or difficult come to life and potentially losing whether it's finances or yourself in the process. And I think that maybe whenever, as you grow as a company, it still falls on the shoulders of the business owner. And they still, no matter what, if they're making millions, might have a vision in their head that other people cannot see. And it's up to the leader, very much like an Elon Musk, to entice people and excite them to make that promised land a reality. So, how do you view risk management? Is it all about the numbers and it's really just a piece of the pie and it's just one piece of data that will help managers and leaders, make the best decisions? And I'd love to hear from your perspective since you've been in this world quite a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, well, you touched on a variety of topics, a variety of questions, and common, concerns about ERM and risk management in general. So, let me start from the bottom up because most people learn risk at the bottom, and enterprise risk management is really more a top-down perspective. But let's start at the bottom. You had kind of your own little definition of risk. I'm actually going to cite. ISO, the International Organization of Standards, their definition, because it is so simple, but I think it's pretty powerful. Their definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Again, just a few words. COSO's is a little bit longer than that. I can tell you what that is, but the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So, you kind of have to think about this and say, well, risk is all about uncertainty. There are things we don't know. If you know for sure something's happening, it's not a risk. It could be bad and you have to deal with it, but it's not a risk because there's no uncertainty.
Right.
So it's and we all face in our personal lives as well as business lives tremendous uncertainty. And in fact, with the acceleration of change that we have, I think uncertainty continues to rise. So it's recognizing, hey, we have a lot of uncertainty in our lives, and for business we have a lot of uncertain things that could happen or not happen. And then I'm going to go to the last part of that, tying it to objectives. So just because something will happen and maybe it's bad, if it doesn't impact your objectives, maybe you don't care about it. So for example, if you have a startup company, in a high tech area, and you only need a few people. Changes in laws related to employment may not affect you that much. I mean, it could affect other companies significantly, but there's always uncertainty about what the government's going to do. But if it doesn't really affect your objectives, we've got the people we need. They're doing the coding. We're building our market. You may not care that much about it. So just because there's a risk doesn't mean that it affects your objectives. Now, the other thing is I just used the term effect. The very first term in that is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So just having a risk that exists doesn't really matter until you figure out what's the effect on our objectives. So for example, using a weather example, hurricane. Yeah, a hurricane is a big risk. So let's say you live in Florida. It's not a risk everywhere, but
Right.
there's uncertainty about whether that hurricane may hit you, whether it's going to stay over you for a few days or whether it just kind of spins off. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So if you're a company that has say a manufacturing facility on the coast of Florida, that kind of risk is real to you. But now you have to think about, well, okay, what's the effect on our objectives? If you have a manufacturing facility there that's pretty important, that effect can be pretty significant. It could close it down. It may make it impossible for your employees to get to work. If you are a virtual organization where you have employees working there, well, they can bug out and work from somewhere else. So the effects on your objectives could be very different than it would be for a manufacturing organization. So what I think people need to do, and entrepreneurs, people who develop their own businesses, they kind of figure this out intuitively as they're trying to say, here's what I want to accomplish long term. These are my objectives, my goals, my strategies. And then you think about, well, so what can happen that may affect my ability to achieve those objectives? What are the uncertainties that may have to deal with? And then you decide, do I want to devote a lot of effort to that or not? Again, in the case of the hurricane, if you have virtual employees, you probably don't devote much effort to it. You just say, hey, watch the weather. Those things come in pretty slowly. And if you need to bug out, we'll put you up in a hotel inland somewhere and you'll be just fine. If you have a manufacturing facility there, it's a different story. And you may have to say, well, what if that facility goes down? Can we, move our manufacturing to another location? Even if it's open, where we have highways closed and inability to get raw materials and source other things there. So there's a lot of different individual things you need to think about. Now, so that's at the bottom level. That's what risk is. And by the way, I would add one other thing. When you look at that simple ISO definition, the effect of uncertainty on objectives, the effect could be positive. So we always think about, well, risk is something bad that could happen, and more often than not, it isn't. It is, but there are times when a risk event could have a positive impact. Let's say you are, in a business that makes plywood, and you see a hurricane coming. Well, if you can get the plywood, down to that coast, you may be able to sell a lot of it as they, put plywood on their buildings to try and withstand the effects of the storm. So in that case, for that plywood manufacturer, it's actually an upside of a hurricane because they may have extra business during that point in time. So, what I like to tell people is that you need to understand the bad things that can happen, but you also need to understand the good things that need to happen and how to exploit those to ultimately really be successful in your business. So again, I talked about a kind of a low level. Now, what risk management does is it recognizes that maybe in really small businesses, startups, one or two people may be able to figure it out and manage it on their own. As you get bigger, it takes a village. And
Right.
so risk management becomes formalized a little more because you say, well, I'm going to need help from these people over here if this risk event occurs, or I may want to insure against it. Insurance is a form of risk management. That's transferring the risk to somebody else. You may outsource certain things at certain times. That's another form of risk sharing, saying, well, somebody else can handle it better than I can in these risk scenarios. And so risk management starts to become more than just managing individual risk, and it's managing a portfolio of risks. Now, the enterprise part comes into it, and a lot of people still don't like the word enterprise, and I don't really care, whether you want to call it ERM or just RM, but enterprise brings in the notion that it really has to be top down. So if you have a larger organization, the board, can't be oblivious to risk management. They have to understand what the risks are to the organization because they're responsible ultimately for long-term achievement, them with the, senior management. And so the board will set direction. The board may establish a risk appetite, et cetera. So it's more of a top-down approach, covers everything within the enterprise. That's why it's called enterprise risk management. But as I say, many people just throw out the word E and just say it's all about risk management. And that's fine as long as you recognize, don't ignore the top. The board, senior management, they still have a very, very important role in it. So kind of a long-winded answer to the things that you proposed there. And I may not have even answered everything that you asked about, but I think it is important to kind of understand fundamentally risk is about uncertainty. It has a positive side and a negative side. And ultimately, it's about how it affects the achievement of your objectives. Those are kind of the key concepts that are critical in risk management.
And so if you are on the EM side, you are constantly spotting and documenting the threats, basically, or what the uncertainties are. And I guess maybe when it comes to these board meetings, I'm trying to envision what it looks like in the room with PepsiCo, for example. And I think you were on the auditing side, which is
Yeah.
probably very similar to what we're talking about. But you're basically making it aware to the team and teams that this is what we need to look out for. This is maybe the cost benefit analysis. Is that what it looks? I mean, is it all based off of numbers, or are there many factors? Because I'm just trying to piece it all together for me and for the audience.
Yeah, so let me answer the second question first. There are many factors. I mean, most things can be boiled down to, the dollars and cents, what's it going to cost us? But I say there's many factors because there are other outcomes than just what it costs you. For example, I'll use the example if you have a manufacturing facility. If you have a safety event at that facility and unfortunately it results in a fatality, the dollars and cents may not be that huge. You'll probably have an OSHA fine and some things you need to fix, but the dollars and cents aren't that huge. But somebody has lost their life. So again, sometimes the outcomes outside of the dollars and cents actually can be more extreme. Similarly, if it's something that maybe doesn't cost you much right now, but may be an indication that your business model is becoming obsolete, well, that's a huge strategic impact longer term, where in the short run, maybe the dollars and cents don't always reflect it. So most people have a much easier time understanding things when you put them in dollars and cents. But I know I always had kind of a matrix of saying, well, here are the different types of outcomes. I've always start with the dollars and cents, the P&L impact, maybe liquidity impact. But then I'd have these other things: environmental impact, safety impact, strategic impact, just so that in discussions with the board, and when I say board, it's typically an audit committee, discussions with them, they can kind of understand and react to, gee, I don't think I'm comfortable with that. It's like, gee, how many people are we comfortable killing each year? Well, the answer is zero. So, you get some dialogue about kind of what's an acceptable level of risk to take on and what's an unacceptable level of risk. Now, the first part of your question is, it'll very much depending upon the size of the company and call it the maturity of the company. But in general, a chief risk officer type role, even if it's a different title, somebody who's given that broad responsibility, they're probably not by themselves going to be identifying every uncertainty that could occur, any new and emerging risk. But they're the ones that are kind of the repository for it. They have the training to think about impact and likelihood and velocity of another type of risk factors. So, what then you would probably do is, the top risk person may be reporting directly to the audit committee. They may report up through a CFO or something like that. So they'll be pulling information together from others. But get back to the phrase I used before: it takes a village. So if I'm responsible for that, call it company-wide or enterprise-wide risk universe, I'm still going out to the people in the business and talking to them. What's changing? What do you seek maybe coming down the road? You have to be a little prescient at times. It's not always what's about to hit you. And trying to then help them think through the things that could impact positively or negatively their business, the part that they're experts in, so that I could then pull that up into a definition and kind of a qualification of how significant that risk may be. And then when you get up to presenting to an audit committee, well, you don't want to present everything. They don't need to see everything, and audit committee is supposed to be, nose in, fingers out. So they need to have awareness, but they're not managing the business. So it may be just a top 10 list. I always am wary about cutting off a number. It may just be the top risks that, hit certain criteria that they need to be aware of. They perhaps need periodic updates. How are we doing? Are we seeing our vulnerability to certain risk events go up or go down, and why? And then, ultimately, a board is all about providing oversight and direction. So then they can say, I'm not comfortable with that, or, hey, I think you're being a little bit too conservative. I think we can take on a little more risk, because in doing so, it might allow us to grow the business more and be successful longer term. So that's how it kind of all gets connected together. That's where that enterprise or top-down perspective is important, because they really, the board and executives are the ones who can really say, take more risk or take less risks. And of course, if you take more risks, and more bad things may happen. But if you don't take more risk, you'll probably be left behind in a competitive marketplace. So I
Yeah.
don't know, did that kind of answer the question you were getting to?
Yeah, yeah. And it's making me think of, everybody has different levels of risk that they can handle
Mm-hmm.
based off of age, based off of maturity, based off of skill set, based off of tools and resources, based off of the economy and the market. And
Sure.
so a couple things came to mind. I know that we've worked with many entrepreneurs who were in real estate in 2007, 2008, whenever the market went to shit. Now, there are many people who got out of it and ran away from it. And then some of my clients went all in when everybody else was running away, and they became multimillionaires as a result.
Yep.
The risk was extremely high at that moment, but that's where the reward is. And it makes me think of even Ryanair. I was just interviewing an expert on certain businesses like Ryanair. Ryanair waits till whenever Boeing, is struggling with sales. Whenever the market kind of falls out beneath them, then they go in and they have buying power, and they say, "Okay, we haven't made any moves for a while, but we'll buy from you, Boeing. But we want it for dirt cheap prices because we're your only
Yeah.
buyer at this moment." So
Yeah.
it's almost like there's a timing to it. And I would love to know some of the things that you take into account from seeing it from their perspective and from these boards' perspective. Like, what is on their mind when it comes to risk? And I guess it might be cash flow, it might be seeing what their competitors are doing, it might be based off of how much market can we capture in this moment. There's so many conversations. I know from a small business perspective, I'm looking at it. I bounce my ideas off a few people. I go off of gut instinct to a certain degree. I base it off of my vision and where I want to be 5, 10 years from now. But when we're talking about employees of 5,000 people, like you said, it takes a village. It's more than just one person at that point. So, what are some of the factors that you could share with us that they take into account?
Yeah, so I think you ticked off a few of them as you were asking that question. So it really kind of depends on what the organization wants to achieve and where they are in their level of maturity. So for example, a small startup with venture capital funding may not care that much about profit and loss. They probably can't.
They
They're in a loss
don't. Yeah, I've
situation.
noticed that too. Right.
Yeah, but liquidity is important. So that it's still a dollar element to it, but it's not so much profit or loss. It's liquidity. How am I going to be able to get through until that next round of funding, or to be able to demonstrate that to the venture capitalists we're turning the corner and we're going to be cash flow positive, things like that. So again, that would be an example where it kind of depends. I think as we see disruption in the marketplace, let's see if I can come up with a good artificial intelligence scenario where there's a company that's maybe very successful, achieving their goals, everything, the ship seems to be heading in the right direction, but the board, hopefully senior management's already thinking about this, but the board may say, well, wait a minute, couldn't this scenario of AI completely disrupt what we're doing? And we may look good now, but are we going to still be good in 2, 3, or 5 years from now? And so those are the questions that good boards are really paid to ask. They're trying to figure out what can change our ability to achieve our long-term objectives. And maybe it's as simple as we need to change our long-term objectives. If you're going through disruption, sometimes that's the only option you have. But that's where the conversations come in. And so the information that gets presented to this board gives them enough of an idea of, well, okay, artificial intelligence is coming. Well, how fast is it coming? Well, pretty fast, but how's it being used in our industry? Well, maybe not so fast. If it were used, how expensive would it be? Why aren't we trying to do the same thing? And sometimes you get into a little bit of modeling and forecasting that needs to be done. And again, not everything can be modeled and forecasted very precisely because you're dealing with a lot of uncertain information, but some of it can. Well, if we get disrupted in 3 years, here's what our cash flows and profits would look like over that 3-year period. If it's in 5 years, what would it look like? So again, it's so much about risk management is the information that's needed to help support decision making. And again, typically this is going to be done at the senior management level. They're in the business day in and day out. But a board still needs enough information to challenge senior management and say, well, I'm not sure I agree with your judgments there. I think you're taking too much risk for our shareholders. Or sometimes it may just be as simple as, hey, I hear what you're saying, but my experience as CEO of this other company, which is what put me on this board, says we may have to watch out for this. So to me, a big part of risk management is just making and I'm going to call it information. It goes beyond just data, but the information available to decision makers, whether it's board, senior management, or line management, so that they can better understand the types of decisions that they need to make.
Hmm. Now, this question might be outside of your realm of expertise, but I am obsessed with understanding what makes me a risk taker as compared to someone else. I come from the same womb as my brother, all right? My brother is not like me when it comes to getting on camera, putting it all on the line, going after the business, risking it all. What is it about people who have it that other people don't? My only assumption is maybe the brain has this craving for dopamine. Maybe there's a self-belief that's instilled that says, you know what, no matter what happens, I'll figure it out. Maybe there's a gut instinct that says, you know what, I see something, I notice something, maybe other people don't. I'm willing to take that risk. So this is a little bit outside of maybe certain organizations and employees to put it all together. What makes others have that risk gene that others don't? Have you noticed anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're describing is true. I certainly can't tell you why you have it more than your brother, or why some other people may have it more or less, but it does become kind of a part of the fabric of, I'll call it, maybe it's really the culture of an organization. So for example, at Georgia Pacific, I won't get into any specifics, but we were part of a holding company that was much bigger. And we learned fairly quickly that you need to take calculated risks, or you're not going to grow in line with the expectations of the ultimate owner. And to an individual, $1 million bet is huge. To this owner, $1 billion bet is huge. So we're talking an extra three
Right.
zeros there. And so that's one of the things. While the ownership wasn't saying take bigger bets, they're saying don't be afraid to take bigger bets if the risk analysis supports it. And so I mean that's, as I say, it's kind of a cultural thing that really gets back to the top down, or really, whether it's owners, or boards, or CEO executives, they have to kind of set that risk appetite, risk tolerance way of thinking, and then people really need to follow it, even if they're not that comfortable with it. And another example of that, putting it in more common terms, if somebody offered you a bet that says, I'm going to flip a coin, and if you guess right, you're going to have to bet $100. But if you guess right, you're going to get $300 back, and if you guess wrong, I'll only get the 100. You might say, yeah, I'll do that. I mean, we'll do it
Right.
a few times, and I'm going to come out ahead. Now, what if they said same bet, but you got to bet 1 million, and you get 3 million back, but if you lose your million. Well, we all have some point where we say, I know the math says I should do this, but I just can't afford that 50-50 chance of losing everything. And it's kind of almost a game theory type approach to it. The same comes along with personal investing, where we all have to say, what are our long-term objectives in our investments? Am I trying to be a multimillionaire when I retire? Am I trying just to retire, comfortable living where I don't have to worry about it, or retire only just to live off of Social Security and I won't work as hard now? I mean, we'll all have different objectives, and then based on that, you can make your risk decisions. How heavily do you want to be in stocks versus bonds versus cash assets? It's the same sort of thing, and we will all come up with probably different opinions of how we want to divide our portfolio and invest our future earnings based on those long-term objectives, as well as just our own tolerance for risk. And that's
Hmm.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and while you're speaking, it made me think of uh, the whole goal is to give your shot, your business or yourself the best chance of success, and everything I think comes down to numbers.
Yeah.
And recently, I just started to get into jujitsu because I wanted to have the best chance of self defense if ever happens. Now, no matter what, there's still maybe potentially 2 or 3% of people out there that will be able to destroy me no matter what. But as long as I'm better or more efficient, or I can fight back better than 97%, I feel good about myself.
Yeah.
have the confidence. And while you were talking about game theory, man, that made me think of a study that I heard of recently, or I researched, and it shows that there is something that's going on in the biological DNA that is picking up. I mean, it's almost like there's communication being done without words, without anybody being able to compute it and make it make sense. But biologically, when we look at somebody's eyes, we know their intentions. We could test it in their handshake. We can feel their energy a little bit. But there's a study that shows that two individuals were given random sets of cards. Just keep throwing cards down. And based off of what they expect the next card to be, they would either bet more or bet less. And what they showed was, and they actually put a sensor on the pulse or the blood pressure of somebody, but other ways to manage their emotions. It showed that there were people who were able to know with excitement what the next card was going to be based off of of how much they wanted to bet. And those who felt it, got excited, but didn't do anything, were actually making worse decisions because they stewed on it. More variables entered their brain. And
Yeah.
so the more variables had them make more poor decisions. But the ones who had that instinct of like, oh, it's going to be more, and they bet right away, were most likely right. So there's two things that happen there. There's a gut instinct that's involved, and it's down into the DNA, the gut of somebody, but also that more variables actually turn into worse decisions. So I would love to see if you are seeing the same thing in the big boardroom meetings with Pepsi that, hey, just because we have every piece of data that's out there doesn't mean that we are going to make the best decision possible. Let's base it off of our gut instinct, your gut instinct. What do we have here? What have we seen? What are our skill sets? Okay, that's the one. Have you noticed anything like that?
Yeah, I don't know that I have any specific examples, but I think you're absolutely right. The phrase analysis or
Paralysis.
paralysis by analysis, yeah, and I'll admit that's something where I probably have not been as big a risk taker in life as I could be because my wife got me into something called the Clifton Strength Finders, a Gallup,
Oh,
I think
yes, of
does it
course.
now. Very, very interesting when you understand it. And what it does is it doesn't necessarily tell you what your strengths are. It tells you what your talents naturally are and how you're inclined to think. So my number one, I think, was analytical. Um, Top five, I had learner, responsibility, and deliberator, which means how did I ever make a decision? Well, of course, you have to rise above that in life. It was kind of a good excuse with my wife. What do you think of my hair? Well, let me deliberate on that a little bit. But people are like that, and again, you can rise above it. Talent plus effort is ultimately what a strength is. So even if something, for me, making a wild split-second decision is not in my DNA. If I had to make a quick decision, I learned how to do it. And the same thing applies at a board level, senior management team level. You kind of have to understand those around you. You kind of have to, I mean, you need some of those analytical people. You need some of the people who are really going to think deeply about things. But in the end, if everybody thinks the same way, you will not make decisions. You're going to let a lot of good opportunities go by. So, as I say, I think it's a matter of getting a board to know each other, kind of having rules of the game to say, okay, we've deliberated enough. Now let's make a decision and then move on.
Yeah, decisiveness. One characteristic that you really need if you want to lead an organization or a room, right? Just be decisive. And if you can make it, everybody who's making a decision, whether it's not to do something or to do something, you're
Yeah,
making a decision. So
that's right.
just make it fast, I think. Parkinson's law. There's the Parkinson's law that the longer you give yourself to do something, is that's how long it's going to take you to do it. That's
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And it actually decreases the likelihood of you doing it. So it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. So again, it seems like we've diverged a little bit, but this all relates to risk. It relates to understanding and dealing with uncertainty, these psychological factors, the cultural factors within a board. It all plays in together in terms of how, who's going to be most successful in the long run.
Last question I have for you. When it comes to uncertain times, like you said, we are in them right now. Maybe it's always been this way, but the way with technology is entering our lives with the news cycle, with the chaos around us, it seems to be like we're going from a propeller plane to a jet plane where things are happening faster, which means you need to be a little bit more accurate. You need to have the tools and resources. You need to be able to move and pivot and adjust faster than ever. So, are you seeing the same things? And do you see it only getting worse? So, therefore, risk management is actually going to become even more important in the future because the more you know yourself, your business, and the world, most likely you can manage your emotions and make the right decisions. So, what do you recommend, or what have you seen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what you just described is a reality. It's something that people are going to have to deal with, and probably my best advice is with rapid change tends to also come greater complexity, and no individual can figure it all out themselves. So, back to it takes a village. That what I used to do with my teams was say, okay, these are the important things we need to be kind of scanning the marketplace for, whether it's internet searches, reading the Wall Street Journal, whatever. These are the things that may be indicators of new or emerging or changing risks. I can't do all of it myself. So let's divide and conquer where, I may give this one person, hey, you follow what the SEC is doing, see if anything's coming up there that might hit our radar screen. You follow what the Environmental Protection Agency is doing, or whatever. You figure out topics and then divide and conquer. Have people who have the time and aptitude keep their eyes on the marketplace, the business world, and be able to report back, hey, I sense something is changing here. Let's take a harder look at. I say no one person can do it all themselves, and the more you can divide and conquer, I think the more effective you'll be.
Yeah, you're right. More complexities, right? That's why you do have to understand AI and certain technologies that are around us because it's getting more complex. It's better for you to understand even at a small level than nothing at all, because then you
Yep.
can start to see the possibilities and utilize technology better than your competitors. And this podcast is listened to by many entrepreneurs. You're just looking for that competitive advantage. And I think that the more you understand yourself, the more you are able to manage risk and utilize the tools that everybody has access to, you can win this game. And I believe it's a game.
Very, very well summarized.
Thank you, man. So outside of your book, is there a way for people to get in touch with you? I know you said you're retired, so you're trying to stay away from the spotlight as much as you can. So whether it's social media or a website, is there anything you want people to check out?
Well, so yeah, I'm retired, but that doesn't mean I've turned my brain off for the rest of the life. I'm always
Yeah.
interested in kind of intellectual challenges and also paying it forward, helping people where I can. Probably the best answer, the simplest answer is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and if people want to reach out to me there and say, "Hey, I've got a question for you. I'd like to do some knowledge sharing on this." That's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't have my own website. My Gmail box has a lot of junk that comes into it, so I say LinkedIn would probably be the best bet.
Well, you did something right, man, because I'm telling you, for being retired, you look youthful. You can articulate your message very well. You're a great communicator. So, yeah, it seems like all that risk management and all that didn't burn you out on what you actually love to do. So, I appreciate you coming on here, sharing your insight. Guys, his
Thank
book is
you.
called Managing Risk in Uncertain Times, and it's leveraging Cosmos new ERM, what is it? Risk management, enterprise risk management framework. I can never get that down, but
Yeah,
you have other
and by
books too.
by the way, it's not really a new ERM framework anymore. It came out in late 2017, but the concepts in the book still apply just as well today as they did back in the end of 2017 when I published this.
Cool. Well, anyways, check him out. He's got other stuff out there. Paul Sobel, thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.